Okay, welcome everybody to session 4 of the OSHPD's 2019 California Building Standards Code as applied to buildings regulated by OSHPD. Today we have 3 presenters, Richard Tannehill, BSU Supervisor or Building Standards Unit Supervisor, Dave Mason, he's a Senior Mechanical Engineer with OSHPD, and we have Bill Gow, a Senior Electrical Engineer. My name is Caesar. I'm a compliance officer. I'll be helping with the presentation today. I'll go over some housekeeping items before we get started to let you know the presentation is going to take roughly about an hour and a half. You will all be muted during the presentation. On your control panel, you should see a question section within that control panel of the GoTo software. Please type your questions into that section there. Keep your questions generic. If you have specific questions, please feel free to email regsunit@oshpod.ca.gov or fddwebinar@oshpod.ca.gov. And we'll go over those email addresses one more time towards the end of the presentation. Please know that we'll answer as many questions as we can at the end, but if we don't get to your question, or if we do get to your question and you want further clarification, go ahead and use those emails. We're always happy to help. One more housekeeping item. If we lose you during the transmission, we will go ahead and log out and then log back in, and please do the same. Log back out and then back in, and that should take care of the problem. And so again, thank you for joining us. Session 4. We will be going over several items: electrical code, mechanical code, plumbing code, energy code, how to remove facilities from acute care. We'll go over the new remodel can, new accessibility can, and then some more on what's coming up. So with that being said, Richard.
Thanks, Caesar. Hello, everyone. Welcome back if you've been here before, and if not, welcome. We're going to get right into this with a quick OSHPD update. Again, we get a lot of questions about how OSHPD is responding during the COVID-19 issue right now. And to be honest, we're kind of getting back to normal as far as workload. Our staff is mostly working from home. We are able to keep up with the plan reviews. But again, as mentioned before, the staff does not have all the equipment at home as they do here. So there can be some delays. But as far as our response, everything's kind of getting back to business as normal as far as the actual workload. So where we are in the code adoption cycle in January of this year, the 2019 code came into effect, and that's what we'll be talking about today. And what we do, just a little background on how we put the codes together, is we basically start with the International Building Code. We take the last cycle of building code for California and carry anything forward. We review it, carry things forward that need to be carried forward, remove stuff that does not. And then we take new items that we're currently working on and integrate them into that. And that's how we end up with our new building code cycle. So today, as Caesar mentioned, we're going to be looking at electrical, mechanical, and plumbing codes, and touch on the energy code. And there are some other items that we'll be covering, as he mentioned, like removal from acute care, just kind of in general, not in depth at all. So this is session 4, the last of a 4-part series. The other 3 sessions are getting very close to being posted to the OSHPD website. We're actually in the process of making them accessible and setting up a webinar page on the OSHPD website, and that should be available. So stay tuned for that. If you missed the past sessions, they will be available soon. If you do need them, you can email us at the webinar email address that what Caesar gave you, and it'll be posted later on. And we can send you links where you can download those recorded versions if you want. The handouts should be part of your interface or dashboard for the GoToWebinar. So the handouts should all be available there. You can click them and download them now if you haven't already done so. And as Caesar also mentioned, we will be going through the questions at the end of the presentation. So go ahead and post your questions. And we will begin with session 4, starting with Bill Gao for electrical code.
Hello, my name is Bill Gao, and I'm going to cover the changes in the California Electrical Code, primarily for Article 517. Next slide, Caesar. Thank you. So we're going to cover general items, the essential electrical system updates, and the call system restructuring. So we're going to go over a definition change for critical care spaces. We added 3 new locations: subacute units, which are patient bed locations with people sustained by life support; portions of the emergency department, which are the trauma rooms in the emergency department; and electroconvulsion therapy procedure rooms. So those are all new defined critical care spaces. Okay. We also have a requirement in 517.18, which are general care patient bed locations. And we have a new addition here for outpatient observation beds and gurney locations shall be provided with a minimum of 4 receptacles. So other general bed locations would require 8, but these only require 4. They would have to be served from the normal branch, and some of the receptacles would have to be served from the critical branch. We have another update here for the critical care spaces. This is the receptacle requirements. And typically, a critical care location would require 14 receptacles, some served from the normal branch and some served from the critical branch. But for beds subject to the requirements of 517.40b, they shall be provided with a minimum of 8 receptacles. So 517.40b is the requirement for subacute beds in skilled nursing facilities and other OSHPD locations. So next slide I'll do. Okay, so we have a change in the essential electrical system for hospitals and other care facilities. And the OSHPD amendment here reads that 517.29 through 517.30 applies to hospitals, facilities subject to the requirements of 517.40b, which is subacute, clinical subject to the requirements of 517.45b and c, which are again a life safety subacute area or a surgical center, and acute psych hospitals providing critical care and or general care services. So what does a hospital grade electrical system look like? A hospital grade electrical system is required to have 3 branches: the life safety branch, the critical branch, which is where patient care receptacles are connected, task lighting for critical patient care areas, and equipment for patient care. And then we have the equipment branch, which is primarily used for your large electrical loads. So what can serve as the alternate power source? We have a revision to the code, which we allow generators, which we always have. And we also now can consider fuel cells. So let's take a look at the fuel cell requirements. Fuel cells can be used as the alternate power source if they meet the following requirements. They got to comply with Article 692, which is fuel cells. They have to have a 1+1 redundancy. They need to be able to assume the load within 10 seconds. They have to have sufficient on-site fuel storage for the essential electrical system, which for a hospital would be up to 72 hours. They would have to have a connection for a portable generator, which is also now required for generators in Article 700. And they have to be listed for emergency system use. We have changes in the critical branch requirements, and we'll look at those. We have equipment that are required to be connected to the critical branch. The electrical clock, the sensor operated fixtures, and the alarm systems for negative pressure isolation rooms and positive pressure isolation rooms. These are our existing requirements, but now we have 4 additional requirements: medical dispensing units, medication refrigerator and freezers, patient food refrigerator, single phase only, and pharmacy compounding engineering controls. These are required to be connected to the critical branch. Now we're going to talk about the type 2 essential electrical system used for nursing homes, limited care facilities, subacute, not subacute, but skilled nursing facilities, and acute psych hospitals without critical care or general care locations. The type 2 electrical system has 2 branches instead of 3. The first branch is life safety. The other branch is now the equipment branch. In previous codes, this was actually called the critical branch. There is no difference between the critical branch and the equipment branch for these type 2 essential electrical systems. We have changes to nurse call in Article 517.123. It's been restructured. The requirements are basically the same as before. The table in the building code has been updated and changed, so you need to review that. If you've been doing nurse call projects in the past, please review this new table. This new table has been structured that it includes the hospital requirements, which is 1224 in the building code, skilled nursing facility requirements, which is 1225, clinics, which is 1226, correctional facilities, which is 1227, and acute psych, which is 1228. So again, this table's been changed. Please review it on new nurse call projects. And in summary, I want to remind you that hospitals are required. I just lost the screen there, Caesar.
All right, let me see what I can do for you.
Okay.
It looks like we are back. And
So I was on slide 21.
yep, I'll get you there.
Sorry about that.
Hold tight. Okay, should be good.
Okay, so sorry about that, everyone. So in summary here, we just want to remind you that hospitals, which are general acute care hospitals, require up to 72 hours of on-site fuel storage. The ambulatory surgical require 4 hours. Skilled nursing, SNFs, require 6 hours. Acute psych requires 6 hours. And these requirements can all be found in Article 700.12B2. We also want to remind you to look at the remodel can when you're doing remodel projects. This is CAN 2-102.6, and it can be found on the OSHPD website. And when you're doing subacute conversions at a skilled nursing facility, please see CAN 3-517.40B for the requirements. What you'll find in this CAN is that your 2-branch system that you'd use at a skilled nursing facility will have to be changed to a 3-branch hospital grade system. Other topics to review are your optional loads in 517.31B1. You have the utility requirements in the building code, and this is the existing building code, part 10. It's been updated for dealing with OSHPD 1R buildings. And for your PV projects and your fuel cell projects, please look at 225.30 for disconnect means. And that's all I have. Dave, it's yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Bill. Dave, go ahead and.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is Dave Mason, Senior Mechanical Engineer here at OSHPD in the Regs Unit, and I see a lot of names I recognize. So I'm glad you tuned in to our presentation. I know we're all struggling a little bit with this, these current affairs, current things going on. If it makes you feel any better, Bill and I are both sitting here, and it looks like we're wearing bad toupees because we're way overdue for a haircut. So, but we'll get started here. I'm going to go over the mechanical code first, part 4, and then I'll follow that with part 5. And I'll try to make it quick. There's a lot of information here. There's a lot of backup information I'm going to go over to kind of fill in the blanks here. Now, Caesar is going to be running the slides for me due to a technical glitch that we're dealing with, but we should be able to get through it just fine. And once again, thanks for tuning in. So, okay, for general items, we're going to be going over changes in part 4, which include some fairly minor changes in the tables 4A and 4B, and which is the airflow, ventilation requirements, and filtration. And then we'll discuss 1R considerations. I want to talk about that somewhat philosophically, so to try to bring some clarity to it, because I know a lot of people are confused by that. So, okay, Caesar, go ahead. Now, 402.1, what we're doing there is we're taking out that banner that says not permitted for OSHPD. Just so you know, currently with the current express terms that are open for public comment, we're also doing the same for 402.0. What we're doing here is we are moving towards having these facilities, our facilities, ventilated for per 62.1, in addition to ASHRAE 170 type of requirements. And all of that needs some clarification, which I'm currently working on, but that's what we're doing here. Next slide, Caesar. Okay. On the neonatal intensive care units, we have a couple new changes here. The formulation prep area, we have the Group E non-aspirating supply diffusers, and we have the low level air removal from the space. This initially, from what I understand, came in as a suggestion from CDPH, so we went ahead with it. And obviously, the effort here is to keep the formula producing area very, very clean. We have the same thing in the treatment area / room. It's kind of like the work area where we have Group E non-aspirating supply diffusers, same kind of diffuser you'd see in an operating room, and low removal from that area. A little trivia for you: there are occasions where they may have to actually open somebody up and do a surgery in an NICU and in an ICU. They actually do it there in the room in some cases if they don't have time to move the patient. So I think that's really what kind of motivated this. So it makes sense in that light. We'll go to the next slide, Caesar. Okay, table 4A, you'll notice we have removed 5 spaces. These are spaces that are not covered in ASHRAE 170. We don't really consider them specific to healthcare. They're general spaces. By the fact that we're removing them from the table and recently removing administrative there, we moved these areas into the realm of 62.1 type ventilation. Okay, so next slide, Caesar. Thank you. Now the various changes here in 4A, we're adding observation and we're adding pharmacy. Now observation was added just to keep this table up to speed with what's going on in the CBC and the changes in the building code. We want to match those, of course, to serve the mechanical engineers designing for those spaces as they're going to show up on floor plans now. Observation being that. The other one is pharmacy. And when we made these express terms, we were looking at, we'll get into this a little more here, but we were looking at compounding suites in pharmacies and changes that have occurred there in order to really control fungus contamination in compounding of some pretty serious drugs. So we'll get into that in a second here. Go ahead, Caesar. Okay, as I mentioned, if you look at footnote B, the change there in table 4A, this was brought about by a case several years ago when a compounding pharmacy had a kind of a mystery fungus that showed up in their spinal steroid, killed 65 people, and then these USP regulations all of a sudden became a high priority, and our regs throughout, we've been reflecting these changes. And that's where it shows up here in table 4. It's in footnote B. It references USP 797 and 800. So that's what we're doing. Next slide, Caesar. Okay. Here's where we get specific. In table 4A, at the very last, I think it's the very last footnote now, footnote AB. You can never have too many footnotes, right? So we're down to AB on this one. And this is where we say space is not listed here in this table, maybe per ASHRAE 62.1. Okay, that's 62.1 is also the adopted ventilation standard in the CMC. So and that the language in chapter 4 of the CMC is basically just carbon copy from 62.1, the standard language. So for what it's worth. The next table here, we have table 4B. We have, we're adding the HEPA filtration for the NICU preparation area, formula preparation area, and the treatment area room. Okay, so we've got HEPA filtration on those 99.97 efficiency, or 17. Next slide, Caesar. Okay. What we're doing here is we've been letting the public know for quite a while. We've got these OSHPD 1R facilities. Richard might help fill us in a little more on this, but it does obviously provide opportunities for healthcare providers to keep these facilities in their portfolio and keep them under OSHPD jurisdiction. However, there'll be different things going on in them. Now, when I want to get philosophical, what I'm saying here is for my fellow mechanical engineers out there, think of the systems in these buildings such that if a 1R building happens to go down in a seismic event in the future, design your system such that having the building go down will not take out the rest of the facility, will not take out the critical care areas that are seismically compliant. That's the main thing we're looking for here. And that gets pretty intricate in terms of the chill water systems, the med gas systems, which we can get in later. But that's the basic thrust of what we're trying to do with these changes in the code. And these changes are going to be ongoing as we try to refine this. And I welcome your comments from the public on this too. Yeah. So next slide, Caesar. Yeah, it talks about removing loads from compliant OSHPD 1 infrastructures. So a lot of these systems will be separate in a 1R facility. They'll be separate for that building, not serving other buildings. Okay. Especially with medical gases, that's a pretty hot item there. And you're going to find in some of these cases too, for some of these medical campuses, you'll see something like a med gas source equipment, maybe a chiller that might be trying to serve other buildings or might be applicable to serve other buildings. That's where you have to be careful about these requirements. So next slide, Caesar. Okay, we'll go on to part 5 here for the plumbing code, and this will even be quicker. General terms, general items here, and table 4.2 updates. Next slide, there you go. What we're doing here is we're taking the floor drains out of the compounding buffer or anteroom. So we're taking them out of the critical, the ISO standard compounding suite areas. The reason for that is the traps in sewer traps, they can carry bacteria and fungus that can get sucked into the air and then contaminate the medications. And that's really pertinent now. Now we're dealing with another corona, SARS type virus. That's also going to be a factor, plumbing traps. So, and for what it's worth here, you'll see that a lot of you probably already know we have hand wash fixtures in the anterooms in these facilities, and there's some talk now as the knowledge is growing that those hand wash fixtures in the anteroom probably are a source of contamination. Just note that maybe in the future we might be trying to get those moved out of those anterooms. So same kind of problem here. Next slide, Caesar. Okay, various changes. Once again here, we're just trying to keep up with the changes in the building code regarding observation units. And we do have a couple different changes in table 4.2 on plumbing fixtures. We have some stuff where we've got accessible to the unit, toilet rooms in a corridor nearby and things like that. So we're addressing that here in table 4.2. It's nothing too big, really. Next slide, Caesar. Okay.
Okay, I guess I'm on. This is Richard. So we're going to talk a little about the energy code and how it applies to healthcare facilities. First, I want to talk about the jurisdiction. Codes adopted by the Energy Commission typically use a commissioning process. Working with the California Energy Commission, we have shown them the TIO program that OSHPD uses, and is actually in excess of what they were requiring. So they are allowing us to continue using our TIO program to verify the applications being proposed or installed, and we'll go over that a little bit more. So what's required for energy efficiency program? And it's basically new elements related through A through D here. And so this is HVAC systems, indoor lighting systems, water heating systems, and the building envelope considerations. And the key word here is new elements. If any of these things are going in new, does require, they are required to meet the Energy Commission requirements, Part 6 of the building code. And we'll go through a little bit of examples on these as we go through. But I just want to emphasize this is a new systems going in. So under section 141, it identifies the additions, alteration, repairs that would require compliance with the energy section. And one of the things to note here for healthcare is any alterations to healthcare facilities are not required to comply with this section. This is specifically to like remodels and alterations. So healthcare facilities are exempt when they're doing remodels. Okay, and healthcare facility in this sense is that per the Energy Commission is identified as any building or portion that is licensed through the Health and Safety Code through 1204 or 1250, which is basically hospitals or clinics. I do anticipate a change of that in the future, so keep an eye on it. But for now, existing healthcare facilities that are licensed, keyword being licensed, are exempt from remodel requirements. So let's look at the definitions and how they're applied. OSHPD versus the Energy Commission's definition of addition. What's the difference? Okay, OSHPD defines an addition as an extension or increase in floor area or height of an existing building or structure. This would be an expansion, extension, and an increase in gross floor area or height. The Energy Commission identifies an addition as any change to a building that increases the conditioned floor area and conditioned volume. That's quite a bit of difference in how we're looking at that. So any newly conditioned space would meet the requirement of an addition. So you can have a shelled space. If it wasn't previously conditioned and now you're going to be conditioning it, it would meet that requirement and fall under the requirements of an addition. Okay. So again, the newly conditioned space, any space being converted from unconditioned to directly conditioned or indirectly conditioned space. So what's regulated? These are the items I mentioned before. We're looking at envelope, including walls, windows, roof, floors, and other elements. This would apply to any addition, expansion, or new buildings. Mechanical systems, they're limited to all new equipment going into a building for an addition or a new project. And basically everyone worries about this, but the mechanical systems that are already out there that are available to purchase in California already meet these requirements. But a basis of design is required when using any of these 4 systems. So we're also looking at lighting systems with exceptions for specialty lighting like surgery and exam lights, but your standard housekeeping lighting or general lighting. Okay. And domestic hot water systems, regulating efficiency of equipment and controls. These all are required to meet the requirements of the Energy Commission. Okay, when we come down to enforcement, We do require verification of installation for LED lighting. Basically, the 4 items we just mentioned, building envelope and equipment efficiency ratings, will have to be confirmed. And this is where this authority comes from in Part 6 of the Energy Code. It says an acceptance test technician or field technician can observe the installation, and that any agency or organization can approve the commission to train and certify this test technician. This is equivalent to our IOR system. So this gives us the authority to use our IOR system to verify compliance with these systems. Okay. So to verify this compliance, there's a new section in the TIO that has been added by the ISU Inspection Services Unit. It's tab E on the TIO. And what you're going to be seeing is the NRCI, which is basically your compliance of installation. And there's a whole list here, it goes beyond these 4 that are shown here. But if any of these are being installed, there is a certificate of installation that is required to be submitted, and it'll be signed off by the inspector that it was received. It's not the IOR's responsibility to do these certificates, but they are responsible for helping to gather them, and it's actually the design team's responsibility to administer the TIO. So resources, training, and software for this program. We're not seeing a whole lot of these come in yet, but they are starting to come in. There is a third-party agency called Energy Code ACE that we have been working with to provide they provide modeling help. They also help with the forms, and they also did some online training over the last year. This has been going on, and a lot of them are recorded, so you can check their website as well as attend some online training that they are still providing. And kind of their test modeling is done to show that you can meet the requirements of the Energy Code without making your hospital look like a shoebox. So they provide real-world examples that have been done and meet all the energy requirements for new facilities. These are the forms that are available. The NRCC, the non-residential certificates of compliance. These are submitted when you do plan review, and they are required for the different portions of work that you are doing, and they are submitted with your project. Okay, the green stars, things you'll be using these forms all the time for your sign lighting, outdoor lighting, and your electrical. The red X's, don't need to worry about solar ready or commissioning, because our TIO program takes over for those. And you'll be using these other forms quite a bit as well for your envelope, indoor lighting, your performance and process, and your mechanical systems. This is a connection at Energy Code ACE is their web address. Again, they provide ongoing training and specific to healthcare facilities. We've actually been meeting with them to go through a healthcare specific training program that they are currently working on. That should be out. Hopefully, it's going to be out this summer or late summer. But this is their contact information. Again, they are a third-party company that is working with the Energy Commission to provide the modeling and training. So this is just additional information on the training that's available. And how does this apply to existing buildings? So if you're doing a remodel, or you are exempt from these requirements. So the area in red would not be required to be anything. But if the area in red was an addition to the work, now this would apply because all this equipment is new. It's a new conditioned space. It's new volume. Okay, so your new lighting controls, the new HVAC equipment, and on the ventilation shafts, all that would have to meet the requirements of Part 6. Okay, again, these only require new elements at the time of construction and for additions and new work only. Okay, as Dave was mentioning before, there are opportunities for savings. So you can revisit the HVAC loads based on new occupancies when you're applying these, and you may have different air changes or required ventilation rates that you may experience some savings. You might relook at the existing filtration requirements at the time. Again, what we're doing is looking at if you are doing a remodel, even though it doesn't apply, these are times to look at the opportunities of what's in the facility. And a lot of this could be applying, especially if you're removing a building from acute care service. You don't have the same demands or requirements to be met. And so continuing on, considering converting to variable volume air and determine lighting levels that would be required for specific tasks. Okay, we're actually nearing completion of this. There's a few other things we want to talk about is how to remove acute care service from SPC1 and SPC2 buildings. We're going to go over the process again, just at a very high level. Okay, excuse me. Sorry, my slides are jumping all over the place here. If you have a building that is non-compliant or isn't not going to meet the requirements, after a certain date, there will only be certain type of projects that will be allowed to be done in those facilities. And that's seismic compliance work or the work involved to remove it from acute care services. You can do maintenance or emergency repair work only. I believe that's after 2026 that'll be coming in effect, but that there are certain dates you need to pay attention to that were actually presented in the first session, where each facility has to report if they intend to keep those buildings in acute care service or if they're going to remove them. So if they identify that they're going to remove them, then additional work can be done and the same requirements won't be required for upgrading to NPC levels. If they intend to keep the building as an acute care project, certain work has to be done with future projects that have to be done to make sure those requirements are met for NPC. Now, if nothing is done, then you will be blocked from additional work other than what's shown here, if no report is submitted. Okay, some of the things you need to consider when repurposing or removing a project from building from acute care service is we're going to be looking at ingress and egress from buildings to make sure that they don't cross from a hospital through a non-compliant building. As Dave mentioned before, we're going to be looking at the utility shutoffs and disconnects that would be required if the hospital is serving the non-acute or non-compliant building. Looking at the smoke compartments that remain in the building to make sure that they're functioning properly and you can do protect in place. The functional uses can be applied to non-acute buildings, such as skilled nursing facilities, and acute psych can go into those buildings, even though it's considered removed from acute care. Acute psych can be located in there because they do not have the same SPC NPC requirements. You need to look at your fire alarm panels and zones to make sure they don't overlap the buildings and that the control panels are located on the hospital side of any separation that's provided. Same with the fire sprinklers. Your main risers need to remain on the hospital side of the fire separations and seismic separations. If you're removing the building and considering it a freestanding and moving it to a local jurisdiction, you're going to be looking at firewalls. If you're keeping under OSHPD jurisdiction, we're working with fire barriers, which are a lot easier, a lot less expensive to install. So just things to consider. As-built condition assessment should be done of all facilities that are going through the process. And you can have pre-meetings with OSHPD to determine to what extent you have to separate the buildings out. Okay, accessibility is big. If you're going to remove the building from acute care service and move it to a local jurisdiction, we found that most local jurisdictions want the building to be 100% accessible. Now, in theory, all buildings should be 100% accessible now. We know that's not always the case, but it is something to consider if you're moving to a local jurisdiction, where if it remains with OSHPD, construction areas would be what would be required to be made accessible, or if new uses are provided, those uses have to have equivalent accessibility. Is the new use going to, or occupancy going to be less restrictive? If it is, there may be some allowances and some benefits moving into that new building with a lesser restrictive occupancy. Again, a lot of the stuff is covered in more detail in session 1. I mentioned the local versus OSHPD jurisdiction, so that's things that we want to, you would want to consider. Even freestanding buildings can remain under OSHPD jurisdiction, but they have to have qualifying services within them. And those, again, are identified in session 1 or part 10 of the building code if you're interested in looking that up. Licensing under the hospital license. This is critical when you're looking at the jurisdiction that's going to remain under. If it's going to be under OSHPD, there's going to have to be a licensed facility, or at least under the building must be under a hospital license. Looking at local zoning and requirements and restrictions. You know, if you're putting a new use in this building, you may have new requirements for parking, additional requirements for parking depending on the use going into there that may have to be met. And will the site accommodate those additional requirements, as well as looking at the accessibility that we required because of the change in numbers. And then the time and cost involved in either taking it out of service, demoing it, or moving it to another jurisdiction. So there's a lot to consider. Actually, we've already got quite a few questions on removing these from acute care service. And we'll probably answer those more in detail when we do the questions and answers. So what we're asking you to do is trust the process. There's a bunch of steps to get you to the point of removing the project, a building from acute care, and getting it out, either out of OSHPD jurisdiction or identified as a what we're calling a OSHPD 1R building. Do your homework, determine the repurposed use and the impacts. Okay, what are you going to put in there? If you go from what used to be a med-surg unit and you go into psychiatric care, there may be additional security requirements have to be met. There may be separate ingress requirements for patients, dedicated elevators. There's a lot to consider, and we can help go over those items with you if you do a pre-meeting with us on those. There are several projects typically associated with doing a remove from acute care service project. What we see is a lot of projects that come to us originally is just to relocate the occupants, the services themselves. You're removing pharmacy, you're moving a lab over, whatever it might be. There's a lot of projects transitioning and getting ready for that. Once that work is done, what we typically would see is, again, either a project or several projects to start rerouting or making safe the utilities that are spanning from one building to other, putting in expansion joints or flex joints or automatic shutoffs or quick shutoffs on there. Once that is done and everything is ready, then a final project is submitted with be zero construction. And this can be done as a final project as well, and saying this is the final project, we're doing these last bits of work, and also applying to be removed from acute care. But typically we see it come in as a non-construction project, and it will actually go to, once it gets reviewed and accepted, it'll be verified through our seismic compliant unit that all requirements have been met, and then it can be removed from acute care. And at that point, the locals are either notified that that building is under their jurisdiction, or the owner is notified that it is no longer acceptable for acute care services. And there are requirements, signage, things like that, that are also required, and again, covered in session 1 in more detail. And follow the remodel can. The remodel can was just posted. There's a lot of good information there, especially when it comes to reusing functions, what needs to be upgraded, what needs to be brought to current code, and what does not. Okay. If you have questions, schedule a pre-designed meeting with OSHPD. We will be happy to meet with you to discuss your project, because we're finding that every one of these is different. There's different requirements based on site locations, how the utilities are run. So it's impossible for us to say, this is the one size fits all fix for this. So again, go ahead and contact your regions and get a meeting scheduled. And we do have people that are what they're calling a repurposing task force that will be helping, would be basically those on this webinar today would be assisting in this process. Okay, document the decisions to become conditions of approval. Okay, again, what was discussed, what's going to be required, just document these so that you have a record when you come back in, and these are the things that need to be met, and these have been done. And it could be ongoing projects that you've been doing in the past can be applied to meeting these conditions. Okay, plan reviews to be conducted in the appropriate region in accordance with the conditions of approval. Again, we would be happy to meet with you and discuss options, but the regions will ultimately doing the review and processing it prior to it going to the seismic compliance unit. Again, I mentioned the remodel can. We're not going to go into this in any detail, but it has been updated. There's a lot of good information here. We've been getting a lot of requests for presentations on this, and it is being used quite extensively right now. So I would encourage you, if you haven't looked at it yet, go ahead and download it from our website and take a look. It basically takes you through the process of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, and how you get there. There's a bunch, there's flow charts in it for each discipline, electrical, mechanical, fire, architectural, that you can apply to your project. Again, there's going to be another webinar on this in the future. We did the whole one-day seminar in it with the HBSB Hospital Building Safety Board last November on the remodel, specifically, but we will be doing a future webinar on just the can itself. So final thoughts here, kind of talk to you a little bit about what's coming up, what we're working on. We're in the middle of the 2019 intervening code cycle. We're out for currently here with public comment. If you are interested at all, you can go to the Building Standards Commission website and download what is being proposed for this next cycle. A lot of it is going to be clarification to the OSHPD 1R that came out in the 2019 cycle. There's a lot of confusion about when and where it was applied. The OSHPD 1R showed up in a lot of the banners where it could possibly apply. But just to clarify, we're making it real clear that whatever use or occupancy that you're putting into that building is the code requirements that apply to that space. So you won't have requirements for a 1R building, but you will have requirements for an OSHPD 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it might be. Probably not going to be a 4 in there. But that's ongoing. So if you haven't looked at that and you're interested, go ahead and download it. You can ask any questions, make some comments. We'll be welcome to respond to them. This is what we're currently working on in the intervening cycle. Special seismic certification for routers and equipment. A special seismic certification for fluoroscopy and X-ray. And that's not where we're going to require seismic certification for fluoroscopy. But what it's basically what we're going to be allowing is for CTs to receive that seismic certification and meet the requirements for that. Again, I apologize. My slides keep trying to jump ahead on me. There must be a timer on it. Pin 68 was also released. This is clarification of anchorage for equipment. You have your mobile, fixed, and movable equipment. There's also going to be some additional definitions that are answered with that. But if you have not looked at Pin 68 yet, I would encourage you to download it and take a look at that. It really clarifies how this stuff, what equipment needs to be anchored, what can be attached, especially when it comes to movable and mobile. It defines the difference between those two. I think they want us to wrap up. They keep changing the slides here. Changes to materials for steel and masonry are clarified. I'm sorry, I'm trying to read ahead here. Modifications to the SPC 4D requirements. There's some benefits for the pounding analysis that may not be required under certain conditions. So that can save a lot of money in analysis and analyzing the buildings that are adjacent to each other. Again, making refinements to the OSHPD 1R requirements and coordinating Section 1224 with new technologies. Okay, I'm glad I'm off of that slide. Let's see if this one stays still for a while. Nope. Okay, the California Building Standards Code alignments. We're working with CDPH, trying to align with CMS. There's a lot of questions on the fuel requirements for both hospitals and skilled nursing facilities. A lot of rumors going out there that they're going to be requiring 96 hours worth of fuel. Unfortunately, there's probably some truth to that. We are currently working with them to try to clarify what's going to be required, when it's going to be required, who it's going to affect. Our building code states 6 hours for skilled nursing facilities, but they're referring back to NFPA 110. The 2010 version does require 96 hours worth of fuel, and this is ongoing discussion, so we'll keep you informed on that and what's happening with that. And looking at the emergency, I'm going to rip through these so we're not fighting the slides here. Emergency department revisions, just looking at requirements that might be required for like reserved ORs for emergencies, enhancing trauma room standards, energy code requirements. Again, we went through that today. If you have any questions on that, let us know. And emergency operations. We're getting a lot of questions right now. What code changes are going to be coming with because of this COVID-19 outbreak? We're looking at clarifying requirements for surge tents and infrastructure availability. One of the things we're finding that is that the oxygen piping that is installed in hospitals was not designed for constant use by everyone at the same time. So if they have a lot of respirators going continuously, we're seeing that there might be some, we're concerned there might be some bottlenecking going on there. So we're looking at that as well. Major research stuff that we're looking at working on in the future is the chemical dependency programs, revising the levels of OSHPD 3 clinics. There's actually current regulations out there to evaluate those requirements. Boy, this thing is all over the place. Again, I apologize. We're looking at protective environment standards, high, medium, and low. This is primarily for like interventional or bone marrow transplants, things like that, different levels of protection. So we're not requiring surgical environments where they don't need to be. That's ongoing with CDPH. A lot of these initiatives are currently put on hold due to the pandemic, but they will be addressed probably in the 2022 code. And we are working with CDPH. They are currently rewriting Title 22, so we're updating that, removing building standards from Title 22, making sure they're in Title 24, and working with them actively on that. Again, a little bit of a delay due to the current situations. And this is where we're talking about the imaging room, procedure room versus operating room. A lot of the diagnostic services that have been provided in the past have morphed into interventional services, and they require a higher level of sanitation. So we're looking at those requirements. I know a lot of facilities are affected by that when they're updating equipment. So don't be surprised if you're being asked for functional programs listing procedures for your imaging equipment replacements, because those are being asked for and are being required. One of the things we're looking at for 22 is going 100% electronic. Right now we do allow paper. We're probably good 98% electronic reviews right now. And but we are going to the point where we're going to be requiring all electronic reviews. So if you're interested in what we're doing or want to be part of what we're doing, I would ask that you get involved. You're welcome to attend our hospital building safety board committee meetings. We have code meetings. The current one is scheduled, I believe, for June, or is being rescheduled for June, where we discuss future code issues that are coming up. We review anything that we change or even proposing a change goes through vetting of the hospital building safety board's code committee. So I would encourage you to attend if you're interested, and get involved in the process. So with that, we're going to move on to questions. I don't know if this thing is going to continue to jump around. Yes, it is. So we'll go ahead in the Q&A. We'll see if we can lock down one of these screens. Otherwise, the screen may go black, but we'll.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back to the initial slide on this presentation. Don't know what's going on really, but we'll get through some of these questions. A lot of great questions that came in throughout the presentation. So again, we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. If you find that we did not answer your question, feel free to email us again at regsunit@oshpod.ca.gov. And the second email as a second option would be fddwebinar@oshpd.ca.gov. So with that being said, we have a question regarding electrical. And this is going to be for you, Bill. First question we have is, on critical care beds for receptacles required, is there a different number for NICU or CVICU?
Yeah, wow, excuse me. Change in requirement for NICU beds or any other critical care beds. It's 14 receptacles. Now, when it says receptacles, a duplex receptacle does count as 2 receptacles. So at least 7 duplexes are 14 simplexes or any other combination that is that you come up with.
All right, thanks, Bill. I got another question for you. This question deals with emergency generators, and the question reads, requirements for emergency generators, 96 hours fuel storage instead of 72 hours? Do you need a reserve tank for 72 hours beyond what is part of the generator set as required by licensing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And Richard touched on that briefly about 96 hours. OSHPD's requirements were, as shown, 24 for hospitals, 72 for hospitals with NPC-5 ratings, and then 6 hours for skilled nursing, 4 hours for ambulatory surgicals. And those requirements can be found in Article 700.12b. And to continue on that, so what you need is actually 72 hours of fuel capacity. And your tank would be sized actually for 96 hours of fuel, because you'll hit the low fuel level at 72 hours. And you need 133% more capacity, and that gets you to 96-hour tank. Now, to talk about the CMS requirement, like Richard was talking about, that is because CMS enforces NFPA 110, 2010. And there is a requirement for facilities with seismic zones, I believe it's C, D, E, and F, to have 96 hours of fuel, or capacity, I guess you would say. And Richard has mentioned that there's ongoing conversations. Is that required for hospitals and skilled nursing facilities? What is CMS's true requirement? And we'll have more on that later.
Perfect. Thanks, Bill. I got one more question for you in terms of fuel cells. The question is, in terms of fuel cells, I'm unaware of any products listed for emergency use or OSHPD seismically certified. Was this included in the 2019 to encourage the use of fuel cells, or are there already pre-approved products?
Yeah, that's another great question. Fuel cells was added to the model code to encourage the possible development of fuel cells for emergency systems. And the question is correct that I'm not aware of any product that's listed for emergency use. So there's not one that actually is available that I'm aware of. I have talked to a couple fuel cell manufacturers, and they don't have a product yet. But the code change would maybe develop this market. Changes to this requirement are continuing and getting refined in NFPA 99, and the next edition of NFPA, National Electrical Code. So fuel cells are in the code, but like the question said, there's not a product that's listed at the moment.
Yeah, if I can follow up on that, Bill.
Yes.
The reason they put it in there is to encourage the development of such systems. And that's why we identified the requirements. If you did apply it, they would still have to meet the same requirements as a diesel generator, such as the 10-second startup time, things like that. So currently, as Bill mentioned, they do not meet that requirement, but if someone did come up with a system that did, they would be able to use it.
Thank you, Richard.
Perfect. I have one more question for you, Bill. And this has to do with low voltage data, voice and data network connections. So the question reads, does OSHPD electrical codes govern the low voltage requirements such as voice and data network connections and sensors and devices which require PPOE?
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement with power over Ethernet, and it's being used for a lot of different applications. It was originally developed for voice over IP phones and wireless access point, but now we're finding nurse call systems with power over Ethernet and access control power over Ethernet, and then even lighting power over Ethernet. So the requirements are in the electrical code, Article 725 and Article 800 for power over Ethernet, and so we'll be applying those. In addition, though, there is a requirement for mechanical protection. And for mechanical protection systems, it's 517.31, and then you'd also look at 517.80. And what it says is you have an exception that class 2 wiring, class 3 wiring does not need mechanical protection if and only if it's used for communications and signaling systems. Well, power Ethernet to lighting is not a signaling system or a communication system. So that would be required to be mechanically protected, i.e. it would have to be in conduit, metal conduit most likely. So you need to meet the mechanical protection requirement when you're doing power Ethernet if it's not a signaling system or a communication system. And so be aware of that issue.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Bill, for that. That's a lot of good information. I appreciate the code sections as well for those attendees that can reference those code sections as applicable. So moving on to mechanical, Dave, we have some questions for you dealing with mechanical exhaust. First question we have for you is, for low-level exhaust / return grills, is a dimension required by code to the top, bottom, or where is it?
Yes, I saw that question from Mark. Mark, the answer there is it's to the bottom of the grill.
Perfect. I got another question for you regarding mechanical. It reads, for mechanical requirements, is a shelled space considered an occupiable space?
You know, historically what we do when we look at those, they come in and we find that they actually are used for storage and other uses, in which case we've historically said ventilate them per storage or administration, but we're always open for discussion on them. They can be a source of infection, and you have to think about what they're doing. I recently saw a project where they had 3 operating rooms going in. The third one they were going to keep as shelled space, and in that they were going to actually put a positive pressure into it because they were going to ventilate it as though it was still a functioning operating room, in which case you would take contaminants from that room and force it into the adjacent operating room or adjacent spaces like a clean corridor. So it varies. You know, we have discussions on this all the time when they come in, and we're definitely open to suggestions when the designers submit them. So hopefully that answers your question.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. I have one more for you regarding the mechanical code. It's dealing with duct testing. Question reads, you stated that duct testing is required for shafts, but the energy code says it must be unconditioned spaces, and also that there had to be 25%, I think, of the ductwork is in this location. Since most ductwork is in a conditioned space, why would testing be required?
That's interesting. I'm not familiar with that requirement, and in fact, our duct testing is, I don't think we've that's adopted for healthcare in Part 6 at this point. Maybe Richard will remember that, but I don't think that it's in there. We're not actually looking at duct testing for Part 6. So I don't know where that information came from, and I apologize for that. But I welcome follow-up. Whoever asked that question, my phone number is 916-440-8445. So give me a holler on the phone, and I'll be glad to help out with that.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. Moving on to the plumbing code. OSHPD requires both Table 4A and 62.1 tables on drawings. Is that correct?
Yes, that's mechanical code, but yes. Yeah, this question I think came in from Warren Chang, and I really appreciate this question. This is a big topic because I'm on the ASHRAE 170 technical committee. So, and ASHRAE 170 has historically pointed designers to 62.1 for areas, both covered in ASHRAE 170's medical areas and those that are not. They say you can ventilate per 62.1 for any space. But I imagine Warren and a lot of the other mechanicals out there have looked into this. You start doing the math, you go down that rabbit hole. And what you find is when you go to 62.1, you have these factors like R sub A, A sub P, D for diversity, ventilation efficiency, EV, and you realize those factors are not established for healthcare. So now what do? Well, you end up with something that's very soft and willy-nilly, and it's very difficult to enforce, and you can't establish minimums for your outdoor air intakes. So what we're going to be looking for here on these is, yes, in the design documents for areas that you're ventilating per 62.1, we do want a ventilation table. So I'm glad Warren asked this. Now, so I'm interested in doing a webinar just on this subject because I think it's worthy of it. It's a lot of information, and even when I was at the ASHRAE 170 tech committee meeting in Orlando, a colleague of mine here from Sacramento actually presented on this, and the information kind of goes out there and just fades away. And I want to give the designers something they can really use and follow. So I'm open to doing a webinar on this in the future. I've also written text for a CAN for this, a code application notice. And if this keeps moving forward, I will be taking the mathematics in that CAN and integrating it into the 2022 CMC. Okay, so we will be looking for tables. The thing is with 62.1 and anything you ventilate with it, we're going to be different than most AHJs. Most AHJs don't really even look at that and probably don't have the understanding behind these other factors like A sub P and D, and they don't. I don't think a lot of them even verify these ventilation rates. But us being in healthcare, we have to, and we have to make the patients the priority. So I've got the math put together on how to do that, and if Richard will allow me, you guys can reach out to me, and I'll share my CAN text, my draft CAN text with you, and I'll pester Richard about this. We're going to put him on the spot right now, Richard, but I'd like to share this because I think this is the direction we're going to have to go with real clarification, almost like a user's manual for designers on how to ventilate these facilities. So yes, we will be looking for stuff we can verify for both styles of ventilation in the design documents. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. So don't go away just yet. I got another question for you. Question reads, why are isolation valves between OSHPD and non-OSHPD buildings allowed to have manual valves? By the time anyone gets there, all the water will have drained out of the pipes.
Yeah, we've had those discussions here, you know, and I'll be honest with you, from a mechanical engineering standpoint, I'm really open either way on these things. I agree there probably is a time and place for automatic valves. And so I'm definitely open for that. The one exception I would certainly take to that would be anytime you have a med gas type system. If you look at NFPA 99, there is zero mention of automatic valves for class 1 med gas. And the reason for that is if one malfunctions, people die. So other than that, I'm definitely open to automatic valves. We have a lot of good, smart designers out there that I think can certainly integrate these things in fine. We'll be open to suggestions on that. Okay.
Perfect. I got another one for you, Dave. Question reads, does the code require AC 156 seismic certification for plumbing and HVAC piping systems?
You know, it's actually not to dodge that one, but it's something that we have reviewed by our structural engineers here for seismic. Any seismic requirements in model code will apply. And also ASCE 17 modifications that are in the building code that are addressed by our seismic engineers, those will apply also. And there's a list in there. I want to say it's section 1705 of the building code. I'm just going off memory here. But I have notes at my desk. Anybody can reach out to me and I'll send you a scan of those sheets out of the building code that give you a list of what's required for seismic with mechanical and plumbing systems and what's not. And then you add that to whatever's in the model code, and those apply. Now, for me, in the mechanical and plumbing codes, I don't have any amendments in parts 4 or 5 that I've added for seismic. Okay, so but I'll definitely help point you in the right direction if you reach out to me.
Perfect. And this is more of a design question, so you may have an answer for it or not, but we'll ask anyway.
Sure.
So when a med room and a nurse station are combined, do we need to provide one hand washing station to each area, or one for both is sufficient, provided that they have access to the sink?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. You know, me sitting here as a dumb mechanical engineer, if I see that on a set of plans, it would be clear to me that it would make sense to have one hand wash fixture for that space. Okay. But the other question I have is I would go to the architect who's reviewing it here, and I say, can they combine those two spaces together? I don't know. You know, and often in questions like this, the architect will look at it and say, no, these need to be two separate spaces. They can't combine them. So hopefully that, you know, you understand that. That's my answer. And just make sure that you're meeting the building code on the spaces and how, whether or not they can be combined.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can add to that, Dave.
Okay.
What you're going to look at is if a room is required. If you're doing a med room, it requires 4 walls and a door, at least walls and a door. And if a sink is required in that room, you cannot put it on the other side of the door. An example would be a nourishment area. A nourishment area is not required to have a door. So the hand washing fixture for a nourishment area can be shared if it's within like adjacent to a nurse station or something like that. Typically, med rooms have to be secured, and they would be required to have their own hand washing fixture within the room.
That's perfect. That's thanks Dave and Richard for that. That was the last of our plumbing questions. We have roughly just under 15 minutes to go over the last remaining questions.
Yeah,
So
from Winland Lee, right, on goosenecks?
Goosenecks. Do you have it in front of you, Dave, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I was looking at it earlier.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me look real quick. Yeah, here we go. I think I have it. Yeah, can you clarify the Oshpod code interpretation for the gooseneck faucet? I love getting this question because this just keeps coming up. Can we clarify the Oshpod's code interpretation for the gooseneck faucet requirement and why previously approved flat gooseneck is not approved? That's a great question. I really appreciate it. Very quickly, these are infection control instruments, right? They're not really, I don't see them as sinks. They are infection control instruments, and they allow obviously the staff to clean their hands very well. And there's, if you look at CPC section 210, it's the definition of hand wash fixtures. Now, for some reason, we keep having to massage this description, this definition for hand wash fixtures. And there's a few things involved. You have non-hand touch to control these. You can have wrist paddles or sensors, but you can't have a knob with you touch with your hands. You have various other things that enhance the infection control aspects of this. One of them is the gooseneck. Now, if even my snarky reply to this would always be, hey, just Google it. You know, if you go to Google and type in gooseneck faucet and then hit images, what do you see? You see something that's got a smooth 180 degree turnaround, maybe 175 degree turnaround return on it, and it does terminate above the top of the fixture, and it has room to get your hands and elbows underneath it often. That's a gooseneck. Now, why do we have a gooseneck? Not a lot of people don't know this, but the old theory behind it is that if you have that gradual turnaround in that gooseneck, you get a Coriolis effect, and that the flow comes through spinning. It comes out spinning. So when the valve closes at the base of the gooseneck, that fixture drains very well. If you don't have that, you have more abrupt transitions in the direction of flow. You disrupt that, and it doesn't drain very well. Now, this is a theory behind it, but there's very little information out there on this. Okay, and this is a theory that I've just kind of inherited, and I've kept going so far. Anybody out there that says no, this isn't true, and has information for me, I welcome it because I'm open to suggestions on it. And we are improving. The definition up until now has had some wiggle room in it. In order to make sure we get gooseneck faucets, we are currently redefining this definition in the current express term. So go look at those and give me your comments officially if you'd like, because we're going to be enhancing the definition for hand wash fixture a little more, just to clarify this. But thanks for the question, and give me a holler if you want to discuss it more. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave, for that. And thank you everyone for submitting these questions. These are great questions. And again, we're going to try to answer as many as we can. We still have a list of items to go through or questions to go through, and we have roughly about 10 minutes left. So with that being said, we're going to move on to Richard and energy code. So the question is for you is, if I add a new chiller in a remodel, wouldn't the chiller efficiency itself need to meet Title 24 energy code, or would it still be exempt since it's a remodel?
When you purchase it, you're going to meet the requirements of the state of California. That's always required for new equipment. Now, the remodel itself does not have the requirement for the basis of design and stuff. I think there's a question on the basis of design as well. So the requirements are going to be a little different. The equipment's going to be the same. Yes, you need to install a listed or certified system that meets the requirements for the state of California. That's why I was mentioning, if you replace an air handling unit or a water heater or something, it's still going to meet the requirements. So the impact to a project shouldn't be additional cost to meet this requirement. There might be some extra hoops you have to jump through to show the compliance. And that's where the basis design comes in. And to be honest, a lot of it, if you have specific questions on the energy code, we would suggest that you contact the Energy Commission. I believe they have a hotline, because all we're doing is processing the paperwork on this end. We're not evaluating the feasibility of the product.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. I have a question on basis of design. Can you please expand on the definition of a basis of design requirement?
Again, all we're requiring is the certification of compliance, the NRCC, be submitted with the plans. So if there are additional requirements that by the energy code, I would suggest you contact the Energy Commission's hotline. Again, we're accepting the NRCCs, and we, after installation, we require the NRCIs, the certificate of installation, to show that they complied with the work, and we're not inspecting either of those.
Perfect. I got a question on the replacement of an air handler. So the question reads, would a replacement of an air handler with greater capacity be required to comply with the CEC regulations, or would it be exempt?
Again, similar to the first question we got on that, the equipment itself, when you purchase it, is going to have to be listed. Now, if you're talking about, is this considered a remodel or versus an equipment replacement? Again, it depends with the information provided. That's not clear. You have more capacity. How much more capacity? Are you doubling it in size? You're going to probably have a new project. It's not considered an equipment replacement. When we're doing equipment replacements, you are allowed to replace equipment, and it is a project, but it should be equal to or similar in size. And we're looking at weights, we're looking at anchorage. There's a lot of other factors involved with that. And so not so much, I think energy compliance here would be the least of your concerns, because the product itself is probably going to be already listed for sale in California.
Next question reads, if I repurpose an SPC1 or 2 hospital building, will it then have to meet current Title 24 energy code?
That's a good question. There is ongoing discussion on that. As of now, I would say, again, you would have to meet the remodel requirements or the alteration requirements of the energy code for that new project. But we are looking at that as well. So I'm sorry, I apologize. I don't have more information for you on that, but that is an ongoing question that we have, and we don't have a definitive answer. But as of right now, the way it's written, what the confusion is the buildings are still considered hospital buildings if they become 1R. And there's an exception for licensed facilities, but is that a licensed building or not? So there's a lot that goes into that. But if the use, say if you're going to turn it into an administrative building, you probably have to meet the requirements of the occupancy for the Energy Commission for alterations. That's how we're currently looking at it. So you're going to have to meet the requirements for energy for that new use going into that building. That doesn't mean you have to go back and replace all your windows or roofing or HVAC units or anything like that. But if you are replacing those things anyway, yes, they're going to have to meet that requirement.
Perfect. I got a next question. So this question might be for you, Richard, or Bill, or a combo, dealing with alternate power and solar lighting. So the question reads, is there documentation in reference to what elements, if any, we can utilize solar power or alternate power sources in OSHPD buildings? For example, site lighting, building signage, accent lighting, etc.
Can you repeat that question?
Sure. The question reads, is there documentation in reference to what elements, if any, we can utilize solar power or alternate power in sources for sources in OSHPD buildings? For example, site lighting, building signage, and accent lighting.
Okay, so there is no restriction on putting solar on the normal branch of the electrical system. And so I want to stay away from the term alternate, because alternate energy source is the other branch of power source for the essential electrical system. But yes, if you had a solar light fixture, perhaps, I don't know. I can't think that we wouldn't allow it. Richard, do you got any more?
Yeah, we're actually doing a lot of projects where they are providing either fuel cell, solar power as an alternate source of normal power to the projects. If you're meeting the power requirements for that facility, that's fine. Your emergency power still has to be there, and there should be a means for if that one system fails, it defaults to the other normal power or utility power. But yeah, those projects are coming in, and I would suggest if you're interested in that, you would either, you can contact us here and see what the process would be. But basically, it's really not even an alternate method of compliance. It's just meeting the code requirements for that facility.
All right, kind of sticking with the electrical, we have one question that came in towards the end. And the question, Bill, this is for you. Confirming that the 4-hour emergency power for ambulatory surgery is just for eye occupancy / licensed space, right?
The 4 hours is for ambulatory surgical, which I believe is an I-2.1. And so, yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'd actually like to expand on that. An example of this, if you're adding subacute to a skilled nursing facility, Bill mentioned that you'd have to be required to add that third branch. That would be only for that area of the building that's being served by that service. So the same thing would apply here. You would only have to provide the additional service for the area that's actually providing that service.
And I just want to add that the requirements for clinics can be found in 517.45.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both for that. Next question is, past conversations that there were some new cans being posted for this remodel as well as maybe for COVID. Have some of those been posted? How would we be notified of this?
What was the question?
Question reads, past conversations were that there are some new cans being posted for this remodel as well as maybe for COVID. Have those been posted yet? Or how would we be notified of this?
It's not really clear on the question, but I'll try to answer it. The remodel can has been posted. It was posted in November and is available for download on the OshPod website. There is also a new can coming for accessibility that should be posted hopefully in the next few weeks. There is a pin 4 that they've been using for the COVID to allow for rooms to be negative exhausted with minimal construction, if any, without a permit. You would have to look at it. It was originally written for TB and is now being applied to the coronavirus. As far as us responding, if anything else, actually, there is nothing coming out specifically for COVID. If a project is being done as a surge or an emergency situation for the COVID situation, it is being handled on a case-by-case basis, and there are no regulations to go with that. The condition is that they are removed once this crisis is over. They cannot be permanent installations. Once they become permanent, they do need a permit and need to go through the full process. However, they can be expedited.
Perfect. And this is going to be the last question for our webinar today. And this has to do with removing buildings from acute care services. So the question is, can you describe the process after OshPod's approval to close the loop with other agencies to justify licensed acute care or supplemental services having been removed from SPC1 facility?
Okay, I did see that question earlier, and I did try to touch on that when I was talking about removal from acute care. Like I said, there's a whole process, a whole series of projects that have to be done to remove the project from acute care. The final stage at OshPod, it actually does go up to our seismic compliance unit. They review the project and confirm that it has met all the requirements for removal, and then is actually changed in our system as a 1R. That's where the 1R came from. It's a way to track these buildings once they are removed from acute care, but yet remain under OSHPD jurisdiction. We do send out a letter to local agencies when they are being transferred to their jurisdiction. If they remain under OSHPD jurisdiction, there is nothing else required. So I'm not sure what the requirement is for other agencies. When you do work in those buildings, if it's under OSHPD jurisdiction, it will come to us. We will actually be reviewing those under standard building code for California. Basically, we call it model code, but for California, for the types of uses that go into those buildings. If it does go to the local agencies, they are notified that that building, they actually have to approve that, the acceptance of that. And they are notified once the process is done that it is being transferred to them. There's a letter that goes out to them.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And with that being said, oh, sorry, Bill would like to add something. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, I just wanted to, got passed a note from a friend, and he wanted to remind me that ambulatory surgical centers can also be B occupancies. So the 4-hour requirement is for an ambulatory surgical, regardless of the occupancy. So that's all I have.
Perfect. Thank you, Bill. And again, we want to thank you. We here at OSHPD want to thank you for joining us on for session 4 of our 4-part series on the 2019 code update webinar series. If you have any questions that did not get answered, or you think of any additional questions, please feel free to email us at fddwebinar@oshpod.ca.gov or regsunit@oshpod.ca.gov. And just to let everyone know, we are dedicated to providing more informational webinars. And with that being said, please feel free to email us any suggested webinar topics that you'd like to see more webinars on. And lastly, but not most importantly, please get involved with the code development process, whether it be with the California Building Standards Commission, or sign up on our listserv to receive automatic notifications of what we have going on here at OSHPD. Again, thank you so much, and we hope you enjoy the webinar. Have a good rest of the day.